Hello guys. So today we're going to be looking at some videos on transgenderism and science. Just so you know, I'm sure that people will be questioning my background and stuff like that, but like I have a master's degree in biology, so I do know some things about biology. Um, I'm a little rusty, but you know, we'll see what we can do here. Um, Let me just pull this up. So I sent a thing out on Twitter, and several people gave me suggestions for videos to watch and review. I already had this one in mind. This one has let's see, almost 1 million likes, which I can absolutely, you guys, oh my gosh, you guys, I can barely stand even watching this video. It's so cringy. I can't believe 1 million people like this thing. But let's watch this and we'll comment
only
on it.
Two genders. It's just basic biology. Hi, how you doing? Welcome to Advanced Biology from a biologist. You see that thing? So we're gonna go over some facts.
So real quick, let me note a couple things about this dude. I mean, maybe he is an actual biologist, but first of all, note where he's at. Okay, he's clearly in some kind of loft inside of a house. He's not in the lab, right? Okay, so here's the thing about lab coats, first of all. Lab coats stay in the lab. They don't go home with you in general, right? Because the whole point of lab coats is to keep the chemicals and such from getting on your clothing and, you know, from contaminating other things outside of the laboratory. So this dude, either he's not following proper safety protocol, or he bought a lab coat to, you know, make himself look more official on the internet. So yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, it's also kind of interesting his clothing here. I mean, you might think he has a little bit of a bias. Also, let's take a look. Let's take a look here. So he has, I can't really make out what his degree is here, but yeah, so he has a degree, right? But let me point something out here. I have a master's, right? So I have a bachelor's degree and a master's. And if I had a PhD, I would either, you can go directly from a bachelor's to a PhD, or you can go to a master's first. But if I were to get a PhD, I would at least have 2 of these documents up here, right? So I don't know for sure, but most likely this dude just has just a bachelor's degree in biology. He's not a professor, most likely, and he probably doesn't even have a master's. So great, you have a bachelor's in biology. So I mean, that's all ad homs. But let's see. So let's see the substance of his argument. Let's see if he actually has anything worthwhile to say here.
So we're gonna go over some facts together, but first off, happy Trans Day of Visibility, right? So sex and gender, not the same thing. You probably heard that before, right?
I mean, it is. There is a distinction that is currently made. Originally, it just referred to the grammar, grammar with respect to sex. Today, there's a distinction that's made between people say things like social conditions. So like the idea that men are supposed to wear pants and women are supposed to wear dresses and such. And then they make that distinction between that and sex, which is supposed to be biology. I actually think that it's a little it's a little wrong to do that. And the reason why is because there's not really an actual 100% division between sex and gender. First of all, gender, like if we're talking about like personality traits and stuff like that, that flows from sex, and people people kind of conflate that and just say, oh well, all personality traits are. So for example, a good example that people do is they say all the all differences between men and women essentially are ultimately due to culture. And so for example, they'll say that the fact that girls tend to play with dolls, and the fact that the girls play with dolls and boys tend to like play with trucks, they say that's just social conditioning, right? And so that specifically, we can prove that it is not. And actually, I'll show you. There's a video on this. Let's see. There's a study that somebody did on monkeys and dolls. Yeah, Troy. So let's just go ahead and watch this video, and I'll show you how this kind of gets conflated, because people will say, well, this is due to gender, and experiments showing that even in monkeys, this preference of girls for dolls and boys for trucks, this even exists in monkeys. And so this is evidence that so this is evidence that it is not simply something that's socially conditioned. We're not just forcing boys and girls to have these preferences. It's something that's biological. So you have to be careful with stuff like that when people say, oh, sex and gender. Well, what are you actually putting into the gender category, and what are you actually putting into the biological category? Now, the other issue is that, so like if we talk about dresses and pants, right? I mean, or obviously, we made dresses and they didn't exist before, so there is a sense in which it's made by humanity. However, something you have to consider is that the way that dresses are made are such that they fit the female body and accentuate certain features of the female body, which is in fact biological, right? So an easy example of this is the corset. The corset's purpose is to lower the waist to hip ratio. And if you look up here, there's a great paper called The Cross-Cultural Consensus on the waist to hip ratio. Yeah, this is a good study right here. Essentially what they found is that there is cross-culturally, people prefer women with a lower waist hip ratio. So essentially people that are have bigger hips and smaller waist. And so corsets, although they're culturally created, they are not totally disconnected from biology. So it's not like sex and cultural conditions, what people want to call gender, are completely separate. They're still connected. One comes from the other. One's limited by the other. Cultural conditions are rarely disconnected from biology. It's rarely the case that that something is just arbitrarily made up for no reason. We're, you know, these cultural conditions have a reason, have a purpose, and it's ultimately grounded in biology. So, but let's continue with this video here.
Right. It's because it's true, because biology actually has nothing to say about gender. You would have to look towards sociologists, anthropologists, or gender scientists for that. And that's why when you defer to your basic biology 101 class that you failed in high school, you look like you don't know what you're talking about, right? Gender is only loosely related to sex insofar as we've identified certain physical characteristics and have arbitrarily decided that this person belongs to this gender. But
exactly the problem. He's saying it's arbitrary, but even when we talk about cultural things, they're not arbitrary. They're based on biology. We make corsets to lower waist to hip ratio because the lower waist to hip ratio is cross culturally more attractive to to males. And so, yeah, I mean, it's also linked to fertility too. You can read that in the paper that I was cited earlier.
But there are a whole bunch of people from that gender that don't have those physical characteristics, right? It's almost like there's some variation to sex. And that's because it's not a binary, it's a bimodal distribution where you have
Well, now he's jumping to sex being on a spectrum. Essentially, the issue that's going on here is he's confusing properties and essences, or natures. So if we talk about a dog, for example, right? A dog is by definition a four-legged animal, right? However, some dogs have 3 legs, right? Some dogs have 2 legs. Some dogs, I've never seen one, but I would assume some dogs have no legs at all. But that doesn't mean that dogs don't actually have 4 legs and that legs are on a spectrum. The problem here is that they're not thinking about natures and natural ends. The nature of a dog and the natural end of the dog is to have 4 legs. Now, the properties are what flow from the nature/essence of a dog, and it can be impeded in a similar way to how basically you can stunt the growth of a leg, or you can just cut it off, I suppose, but you can impede the ability of the dog, the natural ability the dog has to produce a leg via what we call defects. If you define dogs by their properties, then you're going to run into this issue. It also leads to other issues, such as with regards to morality. So, I would say that a dog that only has 3 legs is defective, right? It's not a perfect dog. It's lacking something that a perfect dog would have. But if you're just going to define dogs by their properties, well, since the dog has 3 legs, that it would follow that the dog is not a defective dog, but it's just a different type of dog. It's a 3-legged dog instead of just it's a 3-legged, it's a totally different kind of animal, I guess, because a dog's defined as a 4-legged animal, right? So it would have to be a totally different kind of animal once it lost a leg. And it wouldn't be an imperfect dog, it would just be a different kind of animal. And so you lose this ability to talk about the good. And that's really the motive behind all this. Because he's gonna point out well, there's all these different kinds of expressions or properties of sex. All these different kinds of properties of sex, right? And he's going to say, well, these are all different kinds of sexes. And sexes on a spectrum. There's not just one and the other. There's all these different kinds. And he's going to say, we can't say any of these are defective, which is what I would say. We can't say that there's a defect with any of these different sexes on the spectrum because they're all their own thing. And that's all based on this idea that we're defining things by their properties and not by their natural ends. So if you think about it, it really pointing out these different properties and such doesn't address the prior view, which is that things have natures and natural ends, and some things fail to achieve their natural ends, and some things have defects. Because I can still say that, yeah, there's a bunch of different ways in which properties have failed to achieve the perfection. For example, if a male fails to, grow genitalia, right? That's not a different kind of, sex. It's not on the spectrum of sex. It's simply a male who is defective, has a defect, right? So, so these multiple different ways of expression of properties, and we're going to see this a lot because this is the foundation of all of the errors that these people make. The foundation is that they're confusing what things are with their properties, but what things are is grounded in their natures, and their natures have natural ends, which results in properties, and the properties may or may not fit what that nature is. So there are two sexes. There's males and females, and then there's defects of those sexes, which are still within the sex. The defects occurs on the level of properties. But let's see what else he says, I suppose.
Two extreme ends, and most people falling somewhere in the middle. Now, this could be due to your genetic predisposition. It could be due to the fact that there are more than two combinations of sex chromosomes. It could be due to the intersex spectrum, but it's mostly due to hormone washes, and it's the reason.
Yeah, again, then there's no such thing as intersex. There's intersex with respect to properties. If we're gonna say, we could say it like that. Like maybe there's somebody, like we could theoretically imagine somebody that has, both genitalia, but in the human species, we know that is not part of the nature of human beings. There is no hermaphrodite nature. That's going to be a defect of either the male or the female nature. It's a little more complicated than that, though, because technically human sex is due to matter, but it's all due to the overall plan of nature that human beings even have that ability to be differentiated by matter. So we don't need to get into that minutia of the issue. That the basic point is that simply because there are different properties that go on here, that the humans have different properties, doesn't mean that their nature is somehow of a different kind.
Reason why every person assigned male at birth isn't 7 feet tall with a raging beard and a hairy ass. In fact, there is more variation within a sex than there is.
Yeah, and that was never the claim. The claim was never that properties were, that properties don't differ. Like nobody ever claimed that every single human being or every single male is like perfectly masculine and every woman is perfectly feminine. That's a straw man of the position. You're redefining what makes something what it is in terms of the properties and pretending as if this is some kind of new scientific discovery. It's not. People have always known that there are more and less masculine men and more and less feminine women. This is nothing new.
Between male and female. And by the way, you could be intersex. You could go your whole life being intersex and never know it. And the reason to that is because when you're born, nobody tests you. The doctor just decides what you look like and assigns you a sex. And
well, I mean, are you really intersex though if you can't even tell? Like what are you even talking about, dude?
And society then assigns you a gender that is traditionally associated with that sex. I really hate when people appeal to nature when they're trying to erase trans or gay people, because when you actually study the animal kingdom, the concepts of male and female cease to function as we understand them. When you're talking about creatures that have vastly different sexual dimorphism than us, species that can flip-flop.
Yeah, but you just said we have sexual dimorphism. So I mean, yeah, you know, some fish can change their sex. Humans can't, right? Um, so what? Like this is a dumb argument. Like or animals eat their poop. So should we eat our poop? No, I mean
sexes or produce both gametes or reproduce asexually. Animals that have gay relationships. No, this isn't a rewrite of history or science. You just weren't paying.
Scotty says they only see your parts. You can be XXY or XX. Okay, but chromosomes aren't what make you male or female. I'm going to have to say that right now. That's genetic reductionism. And I mean, it's easy to tell the reason why chromosomes don't make you male and female. Because well, there's a bunch of different reasons why. The first reason why is that we were able to tell who was male and female, like the entire categories were known before we even knew about genetics. So that's the first reason why. The second reason we don't want to reduce what things are to the chromosomes is because there can be chromosomal defects. If what things are just reducible to their chromosomes, then that would mean that there's no such thing as genetic defects. Because again, defects are simply failing to live up to the natures of a thing or to what a thing is. So for example, somebody with Down syndrome, right? I forget the exact genetic anomaly that involves. I believe it's an extra chromosome, but if that were the case, Down syndrome wouldn't be a genetic defect. It would just be a different kind of human. If we're just defining human beings by their genetics, so we have to define things by their natures. Otherwise, you're just saying that every single human being with a different genetic mutation is actually not a human being anymore. It's a different kind of animal, right? And like I said, you asked me to explain. I don't know how to explain it any better. Like we understood we don't look at people's chromosomes to determine what sex they are. We never have. We've known what, unless you want to say that we never actually knew what males and females were until we studied their chromosomes, then like, like, why would you, like, it seems like that's not actually what occurred. What occurred was we had these ideas of what males and females were, and we had knowledge of what they were, and then we found out that males tend to have these chromosomes, and women tend to have these chromosomes, and we say these are part of the nature of a man and a woman. Part of the nature of a woman to have an XX chromosomes is part of the nature of a man to have an XY chromosome, but it's all grounded in this idea of what males and females are. Because if we didn't even know what males and females were, we wouldn't be able to be like, let's see what chromosomes males have, what chromosomes females have. So, okay, he says, I don't want to go back and forth too much, but he says, I'm defining what defining by what reproductive organs they're born with. I still think that that's not correct because, again, it's possible for a male or a female to not be born with their sex organs. It's not any kind of properties that they have that make them what they are. It's their nature. Their nature is something that's their nature is what causes their matter to be of a certain kind. But it's not the matter itself. It's not the properties itself. You're going to run into the same problem that, some males do not have genitalia, some females do not have genitalia. The same problem that you have with the dog. Um, it's not the properties that they have that make them what they are. It's their essences, their natures, which is something that we can know with our intellect, but it's not something that we see with our eyes. The natures of things are universals. They are also, when we're talking about the form in itself, it's going to be something immaterial, which is why the intellect also has to be immaterial, right? So if you're thinking of defining things by the actual genitalia they have, or the number of legs that they have, or any of these things, although they can be indications of the nature that they have, you're making the same mistake of saying it's the properties that make things what they are. It's not the properties, it's the natures, which is something that we can only grasp using our intellect, which we can't we get it through our sense experience, but it's not stopping there. It's not just our sense experience, because it goes beyond simply a sense impression. It's universal. So like what a dog is applies to all dogs. It doesn't just apply to one particular dog, right? It's a universal. It goes beyond a particular sense. It goes beyond just sensing one particular dog. When you see a dog, you see one dog. But somehow we know that we know something about all dogs by just seeing one dog. We know what dogness in itself is, such as that dogs have 4 legs. We don't have to study all dogs in order to know that all dogs are 4-legged. That's because we have this intellect that goes beyond sense experience and abstracts these universals from it. Kind of going more into epistemology, which I do have some videos on, and wasn't really prepared to talk so much about epistemology, but essentially though, we have to stop thinking about what things are in terms of properties and start thinking about what they are in terms of natures and essences.
Paying attention in class. Let's talk about gender. It's a social thing, right? You got these roles and responsibilities that you assign to a specific group. Now, hear me out. Not only has the concept of a man and a woman changed within our culture over the course of hundreds of years, not only are these characteristics and the amount of genders different between cultures.
I mean, in a sense, it has changed, but in another sense, it really hasn't changed. I mean, for the most part, people have had a very similar idea of what male and female is. And plus, it's not even the idea itself that makes something what it is, right? So if people can have false ideas about what men and women are. So maybe today, if we change, maybe we have a false idea now. But the point is that, but the view that we have is not that our ideas always match reality, but it's rather that reality itself has is either male or female. So the fact that we change our ideas about men and women doesn't actually prove anything. But again, it really hasn't changed that much. Most people, whenever they understand male and female, they understand it in terms of the species, which is ordered to they understand sex in terms of male is the species, or the member of the species that produces the gametes that fertilize the egg, and females are understood as the member of the species that has eggs, right? And again, this is another way in which you can talk about we can talk about how properties can't be what we're talking about here whenever we're talking about what things are. Because boys do not have gametes until, they hit puberty. But we still say they're male, right? It's because they're ordered towards the natural end of producing they're ordered towards the natural end of producing these gametes. Yeah, Scotty, it's faster than typing, so I'll just say I can't actually accept super chats. It's I think they don't allow. I think I have to have a certain number of viewers per week or something like that to get super chats, unfortunately. But I appreciate the thought. But let's continue with this video.
Not only has the concept of gender identity changed since the beginning of civilization, but between two individuals is a different concept of that gender identity.
Okay, again, that doesn't mean anything. I mean, if we're talking about let's talk about evolution, for example, like a biological fact. I'm sure you would agree. Between two individuals, they might have completely different ideas about what evolution is. Some people think that evolution is false. So, like, the fact that people have different ideas about what things are doesn't mean that they don't have an objective fact of the matter of what they are in themselves. So this doesn't make any sense.
What it means to be a man for me is likely vast.
Yeah, hopefully I'll be able to get super chats eventually. I don't know. We'll see. But I don't know. I'm just doing this for fun, not really for the money, so.
Vastly different for what it means to be a man for you. It's almost like none of this has anything to do with the chromosomes you have. Trans people don't just feel like a man or a woman, they are a man or a woman, or neither, or both. And dysphoria comes from the fact that we've applied physical characteristics to social categories, and the real mental illness is...
So he's just making baseless claims. Like, why should I believe that they actually are... Like, you're a scientist, okay? You believe in science. Can you provide evidence that they are the gender that they say they are? Can you provide some sort of biological test to show that they are? Unless you can do that, all you're doing is repeating ideology. You're not repeating science.
Thinking that 8 billion people can all fit into 2 arbitrary classifications. And no, nobody's turning your kids trans. Nobody would have anything to transition from if you didn't apply something to them that they don't identify with. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk.
All right, well, that guy's... God, I can't listen to that again. That guy is really annoying, and I've been waiting to respond to that guy for a while. So let me go to my Twitter page, because some people linked some other things for me to respond to. But yeah, I mean, that guy's like... oh, I'm a biologist, and he doesn't even provide any real biological evidence. He's just, making assertions. Where is it? I don't know why I'm not seeing it here. I don't know, I guess I'll search for it. I'm confused. I thought that I had, maybe I gotta just be missing it. No, it was under... Oh, here it is. Okay. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, I mean, sorry, and I'll try to respond to this later, but sorry, I haven't been uploading as much on YouTube, but, I it'd be a lot easier if I, made money off of this or something, but, it's, this is just a hobby of mine, and so it gets set aside for other things that are more important in my life, unfortunately. So let's see. I think this is the first one that was sent to me, so let's take a look at this.
Hey everyone, so a lot of people watched the video I put out on Monday on trans people, a bit of a departure from my typical content, but I thought it would be a fun experiment to critique both extremes of a touchy topic. I was a little worried about getting attacked by the woke mob based on what I said about comedians and sports, and I did get a bit of that with varying degrees of legitimacy. But it was nothing compared to the avalanche of whiny incels sent over by Matt Walsh himself. They all had lots to say about how I'm a groomer and how Matt totally destroyed me. Of course, this is because Matt couldn't help but attempt to respond to my video, and what's this? He canceled me? Oh no, don't
I think I've seen this guy before.
cancel me, Matt. What'll I do? Wait, what?
I think I'll increase
nobody
the speed
cares.
on this.
So what
It's
was
kinda
this
slow.
masterful analysis that so totally destroyed me, bro? Let's go through it top to bottom.
Let's go through this together.
Everybody seems to be furious about trans people. Half of us are furious that they exist, and the other half are furious about what the other half is saying.
I mean, it's not even really about trans people so much. It's about this ideology that people are trying to push that says that there's no objective distinction between male and female. And, the purpose of that obviously is to try to remove, like I said, natural ends. And they just because natural ends mean that there's a purpose and that there's something that you ought to do. And so, but they don't even prove that natural ends don't exist. They don't prove that there's no natures to things. They just assume it by just saying that, well, things are just their properties, and they never prove it. But they just make this claim, as we saw earlier. But let's see how this guy approaches it. Probably going to be the same thing. I'm just going to tell you guys right now.
I would like to jump in and see if I can clear up some of the ways that people are talking past each other. Now, it's no secret that I'm a bit on the liberal side, but rest assured, the left is not going to get away scot-free on this one. They're missing the mark on a few key points. But as tends to be the case, it's bigots on the right who are the main problem, so let's start there.
We're off to a rough start. Putting aside Dave's smug, know-it-all tone and demeanor, something that seems to be a matter of instinct for people like him, so I'm not going to hold it against him.
Smug, know-it-all tone, Matt? Pot, meet kettle.
The real problem is that in the very first sentence, he's already wildly and intentionally mischaracterizing his opponents. In 30 seconds, he gives us a straw man and an ad hominem.
A straw man and an ad hominem? Look out. The two favorite phrases of every internet narcissist incapable of actual discussion. No, Matt, what I said is neither of those things. It's called hyperbole. I know that's a big word for you. Here's the definition. An exaggerated statement or claim that is not meant to be taken literally. You're acting like I literally meant that 4 billion people are mad that trans people exist, and the other 4 billion people are mad at the first 4 billion people. Really? Not much of a scholar of language, I take it. It's just a fun way of saying a bunch of people and a bunch of people.
Which signals that he doesn't have much to offer beyond this point, because if he actually planned on making a compelling argument, he wouldn't come out of the gate breezily dismissing millions of people as bigots. Sorry, not millions, billions.
I mean, that's actually a good point, though. Like, these people disagree with you. They're not. It's not about hating anybody. Like, I don't care. I mean, on a personal level, I don't care about like what trans people at all. Like, I care about them in the terms of I love them and I want them to, I want what's good for them. But I'm not like hating on them. Like, it's not even about that. It's about the ideology. It's not about the people themselves that identify as trans.
Sorry, which billions are we talking about? You're now blending the two halves statement and the bigot statement for some reason. I said it's bigots on the right who are the main problem. That's true. There are bigots on the right, and they are problematic. That is not equivalent to saying everyone on the right is a bigot, as is evidenced by the large numbers of conservatives who thanked me for my video, saying that they learned a lot, despite your minions mindlessly repeating.
Yeah, but dude, you're still just saying that anybody who disagrees with you on whether sex and gender are objective things is just a bigot. Which is simply, it's lazy. It's lazy. It's dumb. It's just a strategy that people on the left have to, rather than for seeking the truth, they're treating the language as a tool to achieve their purposes. Because, like, that's the only purpose of labeling everybody who disagrees with you as a bigot is so you can dismiss them rather than actually addressing their arguments.
Your straw man. We're off to a really bad start here, Matt. You've demonstrated immediately that you can't understand simple sentences. Or maybe this is your tactic, misrepresent me to stir up hatred and release the mob? Yeah, that's it.
I mean, he didn't really misrepresent you. You called everybody who disagrees with you a bigot. So you didn't deny that. You just said, oh, well, conservatives that are okay with transgender, that agree with transgenderism are not bigots. Okay, so what?
That the people on the other side are furious that trans people exist.
Yeah, you are. That's why you're denying their identity and have devoted your life to spreading bigotry. All
No, we just disagree with you on a philosophical level.
of your content is like this. You make videos hating on feminist comedians, which really just means women.
I mean, I gotta be honest, I kind of do hate feminist comedians. But I mean, that's not really the same thing as trans people, so I'm not really sure what the point is. But I mean, feminist comedians are like the worst.
Because you hate that women can be funny. You can't help but hate. Just saying you're not a bigot doesn't change that.
Yeah, that's it. I just hate that women can be funny. It's not that they're cringy as hell.
The fact that you're a bigot. Sorry.
We're not furious that trans people exist, but rather we deny the underlying premise of gender ideology.
Right. To deny the identity of trans people, you call it an ideology to pretend that there's an institution to rage against.
Overall, it's a mess, and we're only 30 seconds in. Let's continue.
The primary issue is people who deny transgenderism. These are the people who spew the tired Fox News talking points. Liberals say there are 89 genders and anyone can identify as a hamster, that sort of thing. It's a deliberate caricature of reality peddled by all the angry conservative dudes popping up in my feed lately who claim that nobody can define a woman. Let's all take a moment to acknowledge the problems that go along with the ambiguity of language. Sex and gender are different words that refer to different things.
Yeah, but I remember just refer back to what I said earlier about how they're not actually completely different. There's overlap. Even if we, use the term in the way that they want to use the terms, there's overlap between sex and gender.
If you did not know that, now you do.
So we have another common rhetorical tactic from the left, and honestly, I'm quite disappointed to hear common rhetorical tactics when I was promised an utter destruction of my worldview, and I was looking forward to it. Professor Dave says it's a tired Fox News talking point that there are a lot of genders. But that's not Fox's talking point, that's his talking point. This is indeed the official position of the gender ideologue.
Nope, nowhere in my video did I say anything about more than two genders. Sorry, Matt. For someone who whines about straw men, that's already two thus far on your end.
I mean, to be fair, I actually didn't watch the previous videos, so maybe he's right, maybe he's not, I don't know.
Yes, it is indeed a Fox News talking point, which is just a way of saying the dumbest things that conservatives say, because Fox News is a primary outlet for conservative propaganda. I
mean, I don't watch Fox News, but okay.
Activists have said things resembling that, and you run with it and accuse other people of saying it too, like you just did to me. But anyone who actually watched my video knows I didn't say that. Don't you guys hate it when liberals find the most batshit insane QAnon KKK weirdo raving about lizard people and pretend that he represents all of you? Then maybe stop doing that yourself.
I mean, that's somewhat of a fair point. I do think that both sides do take like the most insane, crazy people on both sides, but also I kind of think that anybody on the left is kind of insane and crazy. Simply, defining, pretending like, men and women are not like objective categories is kind of crazy. Also, like I was talking about earlier on my Twitter feed, the idea that morality is subjective, that's kind of crazy too. So, Hitler didn't, the idea that Hitler didn't do anything wrong, yeah, that's kind of crazy. But yeah.
The issue isn't number of genders. You are denying that someone can have a gender that is different from their sex. That's all my video was about.
Sex refers to biology, while gender is a linguistic term that refers to words, but was co-opted by a pedophile sexologist named John Money and applied to people in a vague and ambiguous way.
I do want to say, I don't really like when conservatives point back to like the origins of, this thing, because it may or may not be related. The question is going to be whether or not the ideology itself is intrinsically related to like the pedophilia, right? If it's not intrinsically related, then this is ultimately verging on a genetic fallacy. That said, as I see more and more people try to push transgenderism on children, the link is seeming a little bit more, a little bit more credible. Let's just say that. but still, I'm not all the way there yet. I don't know if we need to be talking about the pedophilic origins of transgenderism necessarily. As I'd rather just address the ideology itself.
Dave never mentions that point. He doesn't seem to know where his own ideas came from, or else he doesn't want you to know.
No, I'd never heard of this person prior to what you just said, because I'm not peddling ideology, I'm just acknowledging that trans people exist and using biology to explain it.
From here, Professor Dave provides a basically correct definition of sex with a long digression into intersexuality.
A long digression. It was 8 seconds.
And then gets around to talking about gender. Let's listen to that.
Gender is a different phenomenon. It is still biological, but it is a neurochemical construct.
Well, that's interesting. So some people say that gender is not biological at all, and it's just a social construct. And now this guy says it's neurochemical. That's very interesting. A totally different idea of what gender is. I wonder if everybody's in lockstep on that on the left. Now, I don't remember if the guy previously... I think he basically said it was a social construct, the last guy that we were watching. So it does seem like there's a little difference here. Let's see how this develops.
This means that ultimately it is still genetic in basis, but it absolutely is not determined merely by the sex chromosomes. It is tremendously more complicated, and researchers are still working to understand the biological basis of gender identity. Human psychology is complex. People need to deal with that. Thoughts and feelings are ultimately chemical phenomena. We all have a neurochemical profile that guides how we think and feel.
Okay, so you're saying that gender is how you feel. I suppose you're going to say that it has to... He's defining he's going to ultimately define, just making predictions here, he's going to ultimately define men and women in terms of what they identify as. And then he's going to say that that's related back to their feelings, perhaps their feelings of femininity and masculinity. And let's say if you feel more feminine or more like a woman, quote unquote, then you're a woman. And if you feel more masculine or more like a man, quote unquote, then you're a man. So let's see if that's how that develops. But I think that I see where this is going.
And part of that is gender identity. The reason that we are just now becoming equipped to differentiate between the two phenomena is that in the vast majority of humans, somewhere between 99 and 99.9% of all people, gender identity aligns with biological sex.
So gender identity has a neurochemical basis because it's a feeling, and feelings can be traced back to brain activity. Okay, sure. I'll buy that.
Thank you. You are officially accepting the main point of my entire video. Anything else?
I will note that to reduce it down entirely to genetics, I feel like that's an oversimplification. I'm not sure that's exactly what he's doing here, because I think he mentioned that it's complex, but I do want to make it clear that it is very complex, and there's more to the way that our thoughts and feelings develop than simply genetics, obviously. There's also, different factors and development that can result in different genetic expressions even. And also, if you're not a determinist, right, you would believe that certain behaviors... Well, even I don't even know if determinism has anything to... Well, maybe it does in an indirect way. But anyway, the way that you choose to act can influence your behavior, your thoughts and feelings. We call these habits, right? If you form a habit towards certain virtues, you're going to have certain feelings about that and certain attitudes about that. It's going to become easier to perform those virtues as you form those habits. So it's not so even, it's related back to your will in a sense. It can be related back. Obviously, some of it could be genetic, but some of it could be related back to your will. Also, obviously, cultural influences could affect it. I mean, I would assume that, or at least a lot of people on the left would say that the attitude of hatred towards, what they would say is hatred towards homosexuals or whatever, they would say that that's a cultural thing. It's not due to genetics. They would say that that feeling is due to social influences. And so also, it's possible for social influence to play a role in how men and women feel about their quote-unquote gender identity. So, again, there's a lot of different factors that can go on here beyond genetics, and I don't think he's denying this, but I just want to make that clear.
The question is whether those feelings reflect reality. That's the question. An anorexic person feels that she's overweight. The feeling is a biological phenomenon in the sense that it's happening in her brain in the same sense that a man feels like a woman. But we understand in her case that the feelings are disordered, incorrect, wrong, delusional, and so we work to treat her brain, her feelings, to more accurately align them with reality.
Matt, this is the best you can do? In the case of someone who is anorexic, there is a disconnect with something that is objectively measurable and quantifiable in the external world. If they feel like they weigh 300 pounds and they objectively weigh 100 pounds, that's not the same thing as gender identity, which occurs exclusively in the brain.
Okay, but why should I care? So, yeah, they're playing with word games here a little bit. Because they're just redefining gendered identity as the feelings that people have in their brains. But the ultimate thing is going to come down to this. What are they? Right? What are they? And as I mentioned, it doesn't seem to be true that we can define what things are based on the properties, which is essentially what this is doing. This is identifying what they are based on the properties of feelings that they happen to have. And, there's a sense in which we can talk about that. I mean, we can talk about adults versus children. Adults have, an adult is just a more fully actualized human being, right? And so that has to do with properties. You're still the same person as an adult as you are as a child, right? You just grew up. The same subject is there. And so we can talk about people, we can talk about, well, this is an adult and this is a child. In the same sense, we could talk about a person, quote unquote, being a woman, if all that you mean by being a woman is having these particular, mental states. However, we have to clearly distinguish that from the more fundamental substance of a person, right? It isn't, and part of the issue is that they're going to deny that substances exist, right? And they're going to say that the only thing that exists are properties that we arbitrarily choose to define as a human being, right? And so these arbitrary properties of the mind are also equally valid as definitions as the arbitrary properties of other parts of them. I don't know exactly how he's going to work all that out, but I kind of have a general idea of how these people think. And there's variations in which you can generally say the same thing, which is basically nominalism. But whenever it comes to Thomists and Aristotelians, we're going to say that no, I mean, you can't really equate these accidents with the substance, right? The substance being what things are, and the accidents just being kind of like an addition to what things are. And so, although we can talk about somebody having these feelings, it's not truly what they are. And that's where the real debate's at. The real debate isn't over whether they have these feelings or not, and whether we can say, label these feelings. The real debate is, what are they really? And how should they behave, right? Because if what they are really and what their natural ends are really is for a particular kind of behavior, say masculine for a man and feminine for a female, then although they happen to have these feelings, they still ought to act in a way consistent with masculinity or femininity, depending upon which sex they are, right? And that's where the real debate comes down to, because the real debate is, again, it's not over what mental states they have. I mean, everybody agrees that, transgender people have a feeling that they're a woman or the opposite sex, right? The real debate is over how should they behave, what is their nature, this again, because these people don't understand the underlying philosophy they're arguing against, they just completely miss the point.
Oh, what other brilliant analogies have your followers thrown at me? Can I identify as rich if I'm poor? No, your bank account is based in external reality. Can I identify as president if I'm not? No, people voting is based in external reality. Can I identify as Chinese if I'm white? No, your genome and birthplace exist in external reality. Getting the pattern? So I'm sorry, this whole bit is an enormous miss.
But let's keep listening in.
The unfortunate linguistic coincidence is that we use terms like man and woman, or male and female, in describing both of these phenomena. That is where the confusion arises, when people insist that one term must encapsulate both phenomena at once. So when someone asks, what is a woman, expecting to get a very simple answer that children can understand, they are sorely mistaken. The answer requires a discussion of genetics and neurochemistry.
Well, I'm sorry you find it offensive, Dave, but yes, I do deny the concept of gender as it was conceived by John Money. You accept that concept as gospel. You're offended that anybody disagrees with it.
Again with this guy. I don't know him or care. The concept of gender does not depend on what one guy said. You're like creationists who try to debunk evolution by defaming Darwin, as though modern evolutionary biology is just people reciting Origin of Species from memory.
I mean, I kind of agree with that point. It's his kind of a genetic fallacy to talk about that. But at the same time, he is kind of arbitrary. He's treating language like it's arbitrary, like I said before, because ultimately this is coming from nominalism. We're just arbitrarily kind of putting a label on these feelings and saying that that's woman. And not only, I can also point out that that's not how most people use the word woman, first of all. And you don't get to just use language however you want. You have to use it in a way that helps us communicate with each other, and that means using language which is within common use. And that's another issue here, because essentially what you're doing by using these kind of weird new definitions of man and woman is confusing things. You're not seeking truth. You're creating confusion, and that's problematic. And that goes beyond the whole thing. That like what things are is an objective fact of reality. It's not simply a label that we're putting on things. And I think that's where you're really going wrong here.
Either address what I'm saying without tethering it to some disingenuous talking point, or admit that you can't and have to poison the well instead.
Meanwhile, you say that the definition of the word woman is complicated, but please note that it's complicated is not a definition. So you still haven't defined it.
No, I did. I defined it in the context of sex, which is the chromosomal definition that you like, and then I defined it in the context of gender, which is anyone who identifies with a gender identity of female.
Okay, I mean, again, okay, yeah, I mean, the same question's going to come up that he's going to always ask, like, what is it that they're identifying as? So like you have to be able to say that, for example, it's somebody who has feminine feelings or something like that. You're still not really saying what it is. So I don't know. Let's see what he says.
This is associated specifically with brain development. You and all your willfully ignorant followers can pretend that there is no scientific basis for this, or you could just type some things into Google Scholar and check the literature for yourself. Here's one, Neurobiology of Gender Identity and Sexual Orientation. Let's browse through some other titles, shall we?
Okay, so are you saying that there's a specific, that what is being referred to, because that's the question. What are you referring to when you're identifying something as female? You're not just referring to somebody who identifies as female, because that's kind of circular, right? Because you're not identifying it. It's kind of like, say, yeah, it's because it doesn't identify it. It pushes that further. Says, yeah, because like it doesn't identify what it is. You have to be saying there's something here that we're identifying as female. And so it sounds like what you're doing here is you're saying that there's some sort of group of neurochemistry, maybe a bunch of different kinds of neurochemistries, which lead people to identify as females, and that is actually what female is that group of that group of neurons. But when somebody identifies as female, are they saying that I identify as a group, as this group of neurons? Is that what they're saying? Because that doesn't seem like what you're saying. It seems like what you're saying is they identify as this group of neurons that cause this person to identify as female, and whereas female still remains undefined. And you're just pointing to neurobiology as if this somehow defines what it is, but it doesn't. Because the neurons that they're talking about in neurobiology isn't what female is according to you. It's the fact that somebody who has this all this is showing you is that the fact that somebody has these this neurobiology causes them to identify as female. It doesn't say that this is what female is. So you're still not answering the question.
Sexual differentiation of the human brain, relation to gender identity. Ooh, this one talks about the hypothalamic uncinate nucleus. You know about that, right, Matt?
Ooh, science words. Wow. Like, you're not answering the question by just pointing to science. It's like science of the gaps, right? Science. So there's science of the gaps. Science will answer all of our problems and everything, and you just have to study science. Like,
Oh, and this one is about the human infundibular nucleus. Brain feminization. I wonder what that means. And the papers just keep coming. If you disagree with the findings of these papers, I look forward to reading your peer-reviewed rebuttal overturning...
Yeah, but we don't disagree with the findings of the paper. It's just, what I'm asking you is the paper saying, that, unless the papers are saying that these unless these papers are saying that this neurobiology that we're discovering is what it is to be a woman, then you're not actually saying what it is to be a woman. These papers don't address that at all. I mean, maybe they address it somehow. I haven't read the papers. Maybe it addresses it somewhere, but simply the fact of the matter that there is neurobiology that causes somebody to identify as a woman, that isn't really saying what a woman is. Unless you're saying that neurobiology itself is what a woman is. but you're not. I need, hopefully he clarifies. I kind of doubt it at this point, but let's see. It just seems like he's just saying, "Wow, science! Wow, big words," and as if that's answering the question. That's not.
An entire subfield of neurobiology with your non-existent expertise. Let's reiterate, because this really is the main lie for you, and everyone who mindlessly repeats, "What is a woman?" condescendingly on a video they didn't watch which defined it. Earlier, you admitted that you're cool with sex and gender being different things, and you are aware that we use the words man and woman with reference to both terms, and I gave you both definitions in my original video.
Wait, let me read this. What is a woman? Sex. An individual with a pair of X chromosomes for the most part. For the most part. Well, that's exactly the problem with that definition. Gender, well, I mean, just the note, I mean, I believe, I'd have to go back to be for sure, but I believe a lot of, birds, for example, have completely different chromosomes, sex chromosomes, than human beings do. So, like, defining it in terms of chromosomes, again, makes zero sense. It's not chromosomes that make things what they are. It's not genetics that makes something what it is. It's something beyond all of these properties. Okay, gender. An individual who identifies with a gender identity of female. Again, what does that mean, though? It's like saying, let's see. Let me think. It's like saying a dog is defined as something that is a dog. It's like saying that. It's circular. It's saying, yeah. Because you can remove the whole identifies with it. That's not even important. The point is that you're identifying a gender you're identifying female as the identity of being female. It's circular. It's like identifying a dog as being a dog, which is, of course, true, but it doesn't really tell you what a dog is. I mean, I hope you guys can see the issue here. It's kind of convoluted with the way that the language is, but yeah.
And just now. You just didn't like what you heard and are refusing to interface with it, so you can placate all the people who were pestering you to respond to my video, even though you have nothing legitimate to say. Nearly every binary has been shown to actually be a spectrum, and it doesn't matter how uncomfortable it makes conservative people.
Wait, what? Nearly every binary is a spectrum? Like what?
Sexuality, undeniably so. And sorry, also gender. Do your dance of denial. Nobody cares.
This again, dude, you're wrong. Like, again, you're defining things by their properties instead of by their nature. Let me emphasize this. No science experiment has ever proven that there's no such thing as natures. People just assume that they don't exist and, assume that nominalism is true. And because they're, only educated inside of biology and don't study philosophy, they don't understand that, that nominalism is a thing that they're assuming. They're just assuming nominalism is true. Or something similar, at least. I mean, it's kind of difficult because they don't actually understand their philosophical basis, and so they don't express it in a formalized way. But you can kind of see where they're going with this whenever they're denying natures exist, essentially.
The claim that 10% of people are gay, where did you come
or
from?
Or at least ignoring the natures.
Where'd you get that from? Well, I'll tell you where you got it from. You got that from Alfred Kinsey, who made that claim in his book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, which is the same book that contains a chart documenting the orgasms of infants. He arrives at his arguments and his figures about human sexuality by interviewing sex offenders and prison inmates and lying and pretending that he surveyed a cross-section.
Again, dude, this is... I wish I could just be on the conservative side on this, but he's kind of going for a genetic fallacy here.
The population, but he didn't. So that's where you're getting your information, Professor.
No, but sure, whine about Kinsey, lie about where statistics come from, pretend that only one person has ever decided to ask this question or gather data about it. Anyone who says things that you don't like got their information from a pedophile, right? No, it is not. It is a biological construct. Society can't turn you trans any more than it can turn you gay. Gender is determined...
Wait a minute. Wait. Let me read this again.
Anyone who says things that you don't like got their information from a pedophile, right? No, it is not. It is a biological construct. Society can't turn you trans any more than it can turn you gay.
Well, what if somebody decides to what the heck? I mean, what if somebody decides to identify as trans because, or identify as a woman, right? What if somebody decides to identify as a woman because peer pressure? Like, what? Why is that impossible? Like, unless you're saying, again, unless you're saying that the neurobiology is in fact what makes you a trans person and not merely identifying as a woman, then then you could say that society doesn't turn people trans. But that's conflicts with your earlier definition that simply identifying as a woman makes you a woman. You have to say that no, it's not identifying as a woman, because anybody can identify as a woman. I could, if I wanted to, I could identify as a woman, theoretically. So, so the question is, if we're talking about, so the question I have for you again, is it identify as a woman? Is that what makes somebody a woman? Or is it, I have this neurobiology which causes me to identify as a woman, whatever the hell that means? Or in other words, is it this neurobiology you're identifying that makes somebody a woman? Is that what it is to be a woman? But again, that whole it's so messed up, because the whole idea is based on this idea that, like, the whole reason they group these neurobiological things together. I haven't read those papers, so maybe they do it differently, but the way he's presenting it is that these neurobiological things are grouped together in such a way only because they correlate with somebody who identifies as a woman, right? And so that would mean that it can't be the neurobiology that is what makes somebody a woman, because the person who identifies a woman isn't necessarily identifying as this group of neurobiological traits. So these are two completely different things. It's very contradictory and nonsensical.
Gender is determined biologically.
His indictment of conservatives was complete without ever approaching the vicinity of any one of our actual arguments, and then he turns to criticize liberals to prove how fair and objective he is by slamming them for not being liberal enough.
This is astounding. It's the dumbest and most blatantly dishonest thing you said in the entire video. When you want to make fun of liberals, you would gladly agree that gender is not a social construct because you want to claim that trans people are just mentally ill and transness is made up by society. But then when I say it because I want to pick on them, all of a sudden you have to disagree and pull something out of your ass, like not liberal enough, because you don't want to address the biological basis of transness because you can't. What unbelievable hypocrisy. And why did you stop here? Of course, you can't show anything beyond this point in my video because it's all things your viewers would agree with. I specifically talk about how trans people can't change their sex. Can't show that, can you? You want your followers to continue to spew ignorant strawmen about how liberals think men can have babies and other such tripe. If only you had shown them this bit of my video that none of them watched.
Well, I'm glad you accept some of biology.
And the parts about comedians and sports? No way. You've got to keep those viewers outrageously polarized and foaming at the mouth. How else?
Let me respond to this question. Quick question. How would you respond to a transgender biological male who's a progressive Christian who says God gave them a female nature? Well, I mean, I would have to see evidence of that, basically. I mean, like, what evidence do you have that that's the case? Generally, what we're going to do is we're going to look at again, when we're talking about these things, we have to remember that it comes from abstraction. So we we'll look at the sense experience and abstract from that whether somebody's a male or a female. So I think that, yeah, they would just have to show me some kind of the fact that you say that it's biological male already proves the point that they're not actually actually have a female nature. Like, they would have to be a biological female. There's but like I said, I would have to see some sort of evidence of that. Like, say, if somebody came to me, basically, if say, I mean, I don't know, it's kind of crude, but like, if somebody came to me and I thought they were a female, but they were actually a male, like, there's certain characteristics they could show me that would prove that they are actually a male rather than a female, or at least provide sufficient evidence for that. So, clarifying nature. Nature goes back to what a thing is, again. So, like, a dog, right? Oh, you're talking to okay. Well, just to clarify, nature is going to go back to what a thing is. So a dog has the nature of a dog. Female has the nature of a female. Although, again, it's a little more complicated whenever it comes to males and females, but we won't go into that. Let's just keep watching this video at this point.
So you're going to get those views.
He also says that society can't turn you trans, totally ignoring the fact that in our society currently, and only in our society, only in the West, there's been a many-fold increase in trans identification. If that's not society turning people trans, what is it, Dave?
Well, Matt, see if you can wrap your brain around this concept. When a society is accepting of a particular identity, more people will feel free to publicly identify that way.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. However, if you're going to be extreme on either of these points, I mean, you're just following ideology at this point. I mean, if it's obviously, if you're defining a male and a female as somebody who identifies as a male and female, which is, has problems, it's obviously possible that anybody can do that. Like, you don't have to have the neurobiology of a person, who identifies as a male or a female to actually do that. All you have to do is say, I identify as a male or a female. That's all you have to do. So I don't really buy this idea. I mean, maybe if you do the studies, people tend to have a different neurobiology, but that doesn't mean that necessarily every single person who identifies as trans has to actually have this different neurobiology that they tend to have. That simply doesn't follow from the science that you're doing there.
Like how gay people just suddenly started popping up everywhere in the 70s and 80s and having their own places to gather out
Well, I mean, it's also been increasing recently, so
in public. Was society turning people gay, Matt?
Yes.
No, people just felt like there was finally a lower risk of getting lynched or even murdered just because of who they like to have sex with. I get the feeling you would have been the type to lynch some gay people back in the 50s, am I right? With trans people, it's no different. They have only become marginally accepted in the past decade or so that's the increase. And hey, here's a little good faith morsel I'll throw your way. I'm willing to acknowledge that some young people are probably trying on transness like a hat and proclaiming identification as trans when they really aren't. Who knows?
Yeah, but what does it mean for them to not really be trans? Like, what does that actually mean? Like, yeah, I don't know. You have to say somehow that the fact that they claim to identify as trans, but they don't actually identify trans. What does even identify as trans mean at that point? What does it mean? Like, all you have to do to identify as something is simply look at yourself and say, I am that. and then you're identifying yourself as that thing. And I don't see any reason to believe that you actually, even if there's a correlation, I don't see any reason to, like, a correlation between neurobiology and people that tend to identify as trans. I don't see any reason to believe that you necessarily have to have this neurochemistry in order to identify as trans. I don't see any reason to believe that.
About children undergoing surgery, and quite honestly, don't really support it, at least not unless and until developmental psychologists can come up with...
Also, even if you did need that neurobiology to identify as trans, how would we ever know it? We would never know. So it's like we're not, checking people's neurochemistry. So it's ultimately a moot point. Like, you can never know who's actually trans and who is actually not trans if we're just basing it on neurochemistry. So it's kind of like a useless definition. It also means since they believe that people who are trans are actually men and women, it means that we don't know who is actually a man and a woman. So which makes the entire term pointless. There's ultimately no point in even having the terms in the first place, because we can't actually identify anything with that. I can't look at a person and say that's a male or that's a female. Even if they tell me that they identify as a male or a female, I can't know that that's true, because it could be that they're just, making that claim and their neurobiology is totally different. So it leads to agnosticism regarding who's male and female. It's completely useless and pointless.
With a set of criteria to confidently diagnose transness based on a suite of neurological and behavioral markers.
If you say that there have always been this many trans people, but they were all in the closet, you'll then have to explain why there was never, ever, at any point, ever, a mass epidemic of people committing suicide because they were not affirmed in their gender identity.
There wasn't? How do you know that? People have always committed suicide all through history. How do you know which of them were trans? Only the ones who left notes that said, "I'm killing myself because society won't accept trans people until the 21st century"?
Trans people do have a higher rate of suicide, though.
Who are you to determine what percentage of people who have committed suicide over the past several thousand years were trans? Think before you speak.
Indeed, why is the suicide epidemic happening now when trans people are so affirmed?
I think it might be people like you, Matt.
Gender ideology.
I mean, people have always been against, like, cross-dressing and such, so I'm not sure about that.
Ideology is a modern Western social construct that didn't exist until it was invented by psychoanalytical quacks and then parroted mindlessly by people like you.
No, gender ideology is a dog whistle that people like you use to propagandize others against human rights.
The evidence is entirely on my side, in fact, and not at all.
What are human rights, huh? Like, you don't believe in natures, you don't believe in essences, you don't believe in natural ends. Like, why do humans have rights? Simply because you say so? Because society said so? This always devolves into, baseless claims, assertions of the will that have no, there's no basis to it.
All on your side, because on this topic you are wrong about nearly everything, and your underlying claims are so nonsensical and incoherent that you can't begin to explain them or defend them, and that's why you don't even try.
Well, I just did. Anyway, that's all you had to say, and all of it was stupid.
All right, well, I don't want to watch any more of this. Let's see. I'm going to do one from Woodsox, and then I'll go back to this. That way I at least get one from each. We'll see what I have time for after that.
Logan here says that there's a 99% chance of trans regret. He doesn't give a source, so I looked into it. Turns out, 8% of the respondents to the 2015 US Transgender Survey reported detransitioning, with 62% of the detransitioners having retransitioned, leaving only 3% of the original respondents having permanently detransitioned. Reasons given for detransition were not that they stopped being trans, it was social pressure. In addition to that, a random sampling of patients from the Nottingham Centre for Transgender Health found a grand total...
Okay, I don't know anything about these statistics, nor do I actually care, because it's ultimately based on this idea that what people want is going to be, what people want in this sort of material world is determinant of what is good. So, you know, even if a trans person or a person who is trans was perfectly happy, right, after transitioning for the rest of their life, not perfectly happy, because you can't have perfect happiness in life, but even if they had some semblance of happiness afterwards, it wouldn't follow that it's good, because you're already assuming an atheistic worldview where this life is all that there is. You're also assuming that truth has no ultimate value, and that there's something more valuable than truth, such as, say, mental stability or something like that. I don't know. Whatever people are, not truth, because if truth were the highest value, then the fact that people, by acting contrary to their nature, acting contrary to truth, feel more stable, or however you're going to define happiness, wouldn't be enough to say that it's good, because if truth is a higher good, then we have to seek after that higher good above whatever this happiness idea that you have here. So, yeah, I reject any philosophy that says that truth is not the highest good, that God is not the highest good. All of this is demonstrable, and your view of, you know, relativism of happiness and goodness is going to lead to the destruction of society, and it's a waste of time. Let's see about this, because that was a short one. Let's do another one from Woodstock. Oh, it's another short one.
One of the weirdest things about the anti-trans crowd that I've found is that no matter how much peer-reviewed scientific research you throw at them, they always have excuses as to why it's not valid. Not specific critiques of any particular study, mind you.
Well, I mean, science is a completely wrong subject of study. You know, we're talking about philosophy here. We're not talking about science. That's where people get confused. Do not argue science with transgender advocates. The problem is that they're nominalist and they're relativist, and they deny the existence of God. They deny the good. They deny that the truth is the ultimate good, and that as Aristotle said, the contemplation of truth, especially divine truths, is the ultimate good. They're atheists and they're nominalists, and don't argue with them on science, argue with them on philosophy.
Which could be entirely legitimate, as the peer review process is imperfect, so sometimes bad studies do get published. But it's always generic stuff, equivalent to creationist complaints against evolution research. The researchers are probably either pro-trans or transgender themselves.
Again, I don't know anything about... I don't argue science with these people, so this is wrong. Let's see about this one.
It is the latest.
I mean, that previous video was irrelevant to my positions.
Latest fight over transgender rights.
Arkansas passing a bill blocking gender-affirming care for trans youth.
Transgender kids in Texas are facing new barriers to accessing health care.
Right now, you're probably seeing the fight for gender-affirming care for trans kids play out across the country in your news feeds and all over the internet.
In 2022, the power of science and literature crumble in the face of the trans lobby.
We're seeing just sustained kind of moral panic and attack on the very idea of trans people. And so obviously science is being weaponized.
I mean, we're kind of seeing the attack of traditional ideas of sex and gender is what we're seeing, because people have always had these ideas about sex and gender, and this idea that you're bringing up, which comes from older ideas such as, the idea that man is the measure of all things, coming from Pythagoras, but which is kind of a new idea in the history of Western civilization. I would say that you're the one who's weaponizing and attacking Western civilization here.
At one point, biologists were allowed to determine what biology was, and there were two, male and female.
But there's one thing that keeps popping up over and over and over again in an attempt to discredit the rights of trans people: junk science. But first, what makes junk science, well, junk? First, you have to understand the role that science has historically played in understanding sex and gender.
Again, science. So, well, I guess I'll watch this one, but it's like you're missing the point.
And how that's being weaponized today.
You can't respond, oh, so men can become women just by wishing it so? Tell us how that works.
I talked to Jules Jill Peterson, a science historian and professor at Johns Hopkins, who studied the history of trans children, about the actual...
Look at this bitch. I'm sorry about the language, but like, this is like, there used to be this meme of like the gender studies, extremists. Same glasses, same face, same body type, same hair type.
Actual history of research that's attempted to define sex and gender.
For a long time, the kind of research on gender, sex, and trans people was incredibly poorly executed. It was often done with outright prejudice. It was often done with very poor methodology. And it was often done in order to kind of increase social control of people.
Yeah, big red.
To force them to conform to a gender binary.
Let's rewind back to the 1940s and 1950s, and specifically to the history of the word gender.
The crisis for
I could not watch this at normal speed.
Psychologists in the 1950s was that they had no idea what made people male or female. It wasn't chromosomes. It wasn't gonads, right? It wasn't hormonal composition.
Right, it's their natures. I mean, it is their matter, but their natures have a role to play. I think St. Thomas talks about it as in terms of nature and common nature and specific nature. But matter does make somebody a male versus a female because we are all of the same nature. However, within the nature in common, it's part of the plan of that nature that there be male and female. And they're differentiated by the matter because we don't want to say, basically, to get into this, we don't want to say that male and female are completely different species, right? They're of the same human nature. But we do want to say that they're different. And so we say that they're differentiated by matter, but that doesn't mean that we define things by their properties. The male and femaleness itself is included in human in nature in common, and it's just sort of expressed in that way, in a male or a female way, depending on the matter they have. It's not. It goes back because you still need the universal there, because there are universals regards to male and females. Like, there's more than one. The term male applies to more than one male, so you still need to go back to the universal, and this is something that these materialists don't accept. That there actually is something in common, and that's why they go to it's just a label, it's nominalism, right? Because they can't accept these immaterial universals.
It wasn't genetics. They couldn't find any one facet of biology that predicted reliably, right, who would be male or female. And then they were encountering all these people whose bodies didn't match how they felt on themselves, as I found.
Seriously. Again, this idea that people didn't know that there were masculine women and feminine men. Like, come on, people knew that. This isn't a new thing. You're just pretending like it's a new thing so you can pretend like it's something that came out of science.
When I was reading the medical records, they would assign intersex children a sex, right? And they would enforce surgeries and hormones on them to achieve that sex.
Because they are one sex or the other.
But then the child wouldn't identify with that sex, and it would cause.
But it doesn't matter.
So much hardship.
Who cares what they identify with?
And so gender was sort of created just to make.
I mean, it matters in the sense that we want people to identify with the sex that they actually are. But the fact that somebody identifies with a particular sex doesn't make them that sex. Or right, it's an actual fact of biology.
Conceptual distinction.
Peterson says the war against trans people actually has a basis in the same tenets that enforce scientific racism historically.
We could talk about a kind of history of scientific racism that lots of people are familiar with. It was basically sort of projecting social hierarchies, right, out into the world. White Northern European scientists just kept discovering that they were apparently the superior race, right? And you see this sort of shift.
What does this have to do with anything? Like, nobody's saying that. What? I'm confused. Like, what does that have to do with, like, differences between sexes?
After World War II, away from kinds of biological explanations around race towards sort of cultural explanations that still come to the...
I mean, if you were to apply this logic consistently and we're just defining things by their properties, right, then you would have to say that different races are actually different kinds of humans. But that's not what we say. We say they share a common human nature, but they can't say that because they define things by their properties. So actually, your view is the one that leads to racial essentialism, where there's these different kinds of human beings. Your view is the racist view, not my view.
The same conclusions. Interestingly enough, the history of gender in medicine and psychology is actually a really key part of that.
And the thing is, a lot of outdated misinformation about sex, gender, and trans people is still cited today.
But I think sometimes that the line between junk science and legitimate science changes over time. So it's really easy for people to kind of cherry pick ideas that they might want to use sort of out of context. And that's a lot of pressure to put on.
Again, conflating science with philosophy.
Someone reading a newspaper article or scrolling Twitter.
And if you want to talk about cherry-picking data, the very same psychologists who tried to enforce biological definitions of sex on kids were same psychologists who accidentally discovered something else.
Just that the idea that gender is separate from sex, as in separate from the body, that they don't always go together, that's a concept that we often take for granted as being either associated with or invented by trans people somehow. It was an invention of behavioral psychologists who were working very closely with researchers in endocrinology in the 1940s and 1950s. But they couldn't force children to then identify as boys or girls. That was their big problem.
So what?
About this
like, I mean, if somebody identifies as a toaster and you can't force them to identify as a human being, do we start pretending like they're actually a toaster?
Series of papers in 1955 published at Hopkins, they say gender is basically just your sense of being a boy or a girl.
And science has come a long way. It's increasingly understood now that gender isn't a binary. Peterson says there's still a lot of misconceptions masquerading as scientific consensus.
The biggest right is that there is scientific consensus on what makes people male or female. Or
I mean, there kind of is, but I do want to say, again, people on the right, stop arguing science with these people. It's not science, it's philosophy. That's the issue.
What makes people trans? The anti-trans side invokes really outdated scientific concepts. The idea that, oh, we know what makes people male or female. It's either genders or our idea of chromosomes. Anyone worth their salt will tell you XX and XY are not the only chromosomal combinations for humans.
So how and why should we debunk junk science?
Before I even decide if I would want to debunk something, I first just want to contextualize, where did this data come from? Their work may have been past peer review 20 or 30 years ago, but it wouldn't today.
And we don't need to go far to see moral panic. A 2018 study by a Brown University researcher suggesting that peer pressure can make kids trans led a journal to republish a corrected version. But that same study is being used against...
Yeah, I'm sure it was corrected. I'm sure that was not allowed to continue to exist.
Trans kids right now.
So I think actually the tools that we would bring, right, say to debunking race science or other kinds of just extremely unscientific, but also extremely objectionable weaponizations of scientific discourse, I think we can use those same principles. And so if we start from a point of view where we're unafraid to say, like, look, I don't like junk science directed at trans people because it harms trans people and it's bad science, right?
All right. Well, again, so, I mean, there's this real big problem we have in modern society where it comes from logical positivism, this idea that the only way to know anything is science, and we have this sort of worship of science, and it's the only thing taught in schools as well. We don't teach philosophy, and I mean, we do, but not in general. And so people get this idea that, oh, well, if we prove something, we have to use science. But then it leads to things like this, where people think that they're arguing science when they're really arguing philosophy, and they don't even realize it. Okay. Let's see this video.
What is a woman?
Why do you ask the question?
I'm asking. That's why I came to a college professor.
For some reason, this video came up on my For You page, and while I really don't like giving people like this attention, there is one thing about all videos like this that I think is kind of funny. You see, these videos are all exactly the same. It's a super awkward interview where somebody asks what a woman is, and then records the discomfort or hesitation that somebody shows in providing a simple, clear-cut answer to that question.
Well, it's not even about a simple, clear-cut answer. It's about a definition at all. Because that's the issue. They can't provide a consistent answer because they, for some reason, I know why that is. They want to say that it's anybody who identifies as a woman, so that you can't say that any person isn't actually a woman. That's essentially why they don't want to say, well, this person's a woman and this one's not. They don't want to be able to say that because they think that it ultimately boils down to this idea that it's somehow going to be mean. Like it's somehow mean to say that you're not objectively something that you claim to be, or that it's going to cause them to commit suicide or something like that, which is something that we don't apply anywhere else. Like one thing I like to ask liberals is, like, let's say, for example, that teaching children that evolution is true, let's say that actually leads some people to become depressed and commit suicide. If that's true, if that were true, right, would you be okay with stopping teaching evolution in school? None of them are going to say yes, because we have the sense that teaching truth is more important, it's more valuable than people's feelings and even people's lives. Like, we will die for the truth, and we should die for the truth. And yeah, so the entire incoherency of this comes from a false idea about like what we should value and what is the good.
And the end conclusion of all of these videos is, look how funny it is that this doctor, this scientist, this college professor, this lawmaker, this activist, this woke liberal whatever can't even tell me what a woman is. Aren't they all so silly? And of course, these videos are all...
Yeah, kinda. They are kinda silly.
Edited in that super dishonest Ray Comfort style where it makes it look like the interviewer is the only sane person in the room. In fact, these videos are so much like Ray Comfort's videos that Ray Comfort and his team made one of them for themselves. But as odious and malignant as these videos are, what I find funny about them is the genuine and palpable disconnect between the person doing the interview and the person being interviewed. Because the person doing the interview thinks that they're asking some hard-hitting gotcha question that's going to expose the hypocrisy of the liberal left. But the person being interviewed, more often than not, is somebody who knows what they're talking about. They're an anthropologist or a gender studies...
All right, then why can't they answer the question?
...researcher or a doctor. And their bemusement with this question is not because they don't know what to say, it's because they're just stunned that somebody would be this disingenuous and hung up on such a silly question.
Why is it a silly question? Like, what? What is a woman? How is that even that's not a silly question. That's a perfectly legitimate question.
And if it wasn't for the sad fact that way too many people take these videos seriously, they would be the most perfect cringe comedy videos on the entire internet. Because what you inevitably end up with is a situation where one person is sitting there super smug because they just vehemently denied that nuance exists, and the other person just not knowing where to go from here. But in the intro...
Okay, just like answer the question. Like, it's not that hard. Just answer the question. If you ask me like what a woman is, I can just say right away it's the member of the female species of a human, of the human. It's the member of the human species that produces the egg, essentially, like the female gametes. That's what a woman is. Easy. It doesn't take any effort. You're not gonna catch me in some kind of awkward situation. So if their answers are coherent and reasonable and easy, or it doesn't even have to be simple, like talking about gametes and eggs isn't necessarily simple. So, like, what's the issue here?
Interest of education, let's dive down the rabbit hole and answer this question together, shall we? We'll start with the dictionary definition of what a woman is. I've got Merriam-Webster pulled up here, and it says that a woman is an adult female person.
Yeah, that's right. And a female is somebody who has, is ordered towards producing eggs, essentially.
And while that may sound like the super clean-cut answer that these interviews are looking for, it's kind of problematic, isn't it? Because woman and female are often used synonymously.
No, not really, because female applies to more than just human beings. My dog isn't a woman. I actually don't have a dog, but if I had a female dog, it wouldn't be a woman, right? So it's not the same thing. A woman is the female of a human species, so they're not the same thing
in our culture, so maybe we should look up the definition of female just to be safe.
Sure.
Of, relating to, or being the sex that typically has the capacity to bear young or produce eggs.
Exactly. Like, very simple, very easy. I mean, it's not simple, but it's not that complicated, actually.
Of, relating to, or being typically. It's almost like there's nuance here.
Well, yeah, because there's a little issue with this definition. I will say that, because capacity can be a little bit of a fuzzy word. So, by nature, an infertile woman has the capacity to bear young. But in actuality, they might not have to because they're infertile, right? But that's why, so it can mean either thing. It can be either mean that it, by nature has this capacity, or in actuality, with respect to like the properties, it has this capacity. And I guess the reason why they're saying typically is because they're talking about the properties here, which again is why I'm pointing out to you that we need to talk about how it's ordered by nature. What is it ordered to? So even a woman who doesn't produce eggs or doesn't have the actual capacity to bear young, that she's infertile, she's still ordered to the end of, bearing children. So that solves all the problems right there.
Being is that's only definition 1A. Let's take a look at definition 1B and see what that says. Having a gender identity that is the opposite of male.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is since 1828. How much you want to bet this was not in the 1828 definition? Let's just say that. I mean, this is a new idea.
Uh-oh, there's that word identity. I know that these interviewers really don't like that word, but just for funsies, let's look up the definition of gender identity and see what that says. A person's internal sense of being male, female, some combination of male and female, or neither male.
So it's circular. You're defining. You're just if your definition of the word female includes the word female, then it's a circular definition. You're saying the gender, to be a female is to have the gender identity of being female. The word female is included in the definition of female, and so it's a circular definition. Like, this is not hard. I don't understand why these people don't get this.
Male nor female. So in summary, when we take into account the fact that whether or not you can have children doesn't actually define who you are as a person, it seems that the dictionary definition of a woman is an adult human with an internal sense of being female. A person who identifies as a woman is a woman. And I would agree with that definition, because remember, scientifically...
Yeah, but that's circular, so let's see how if he addresses that.
Speaking, sex and gender are completely different things. Neither one is binary, and gender specifically is a social construct. But unfortunately, the people who make these videos like to pretend that that's a controversial statement as well, so let's fact check that definition too. This is a college-level anthropology textbook printed by Oxford University Press in 2021.
Well, I mean, 2021, like I said, you're probably going to want to go back to like 2013, something like that. And that's going to be a little bit more reliable, I would say, because the science hasn't advanced on this. Let's be honest. What's happened is there's been an ideology that's pervaded certain, that's kind of pervaded the universities, especially since basically 2015 is about whenever it started. But let's see what this says.
And if we flip to the glossary and look up gender, we find the following definition: the cultural construction of beliefs and behaviors considered appropriate for each sex.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a completely different definition from, well, I guess he said gender identity, but whatever.
And note the wording there. Each sex, not both sexes. Because if we actually open the text and find where they talk about gender, we get this paragraph.
And also, I talked about the issue with this before, in that gender is, has an intrinsic connection to sex, so just pointing that out again.
Many anthropologists did significant research throughout the 20th century that demonstrated why human cultural practices could not be reduced to racial differences. This is, of course, talking about the fact that race is also a social construct, but that's not the point of this video. They also argued that culturally shaped gender roles considered appropriate for males or females in a given society could not be reduced to or predicted by the biological sex of an individual.
Well, well, first of all, remember what I said at the beginning about how people conflate things, okay? Again, people often say that it's just a social construct that female monkeys, right, or females like dolls, and males like trucks. But as I showed you earlier, they actually did show that there's, even monkeys have this preference, which suggests that it's not cultural, unless you think that somehow monkey culture is enforcing patriarchy or something like that, right? There are some things that are culturally constructed, though, but people conflate those things, but also not being completely reduced to culture, biology doesn't mean that there's no link at all between biology and and gender, right? These cultural traits. So we need to be careful not to agree that gender and sex are completely separate. They're not. At least not usually. Usually there's a connection. And this is important because they'll all often say, oh, well, it's just cultural, therefore it's arbitrary. That doesn't follow. It could be for a good reason. For example, as I mentioned earlier, we had corsets because it increases the attractiveness of women by lowering their waist to hip ratio, which has been shown cross-culturally not to be linked, cross-culturally to be attractive to men, and also to have a to have a link to fertility. So we got to be careful, because another thing they'll say is, oh, well, it's just a social construction that men like skinny women. No, not really. It's if you're curvy, if you have a low waist to hip ratio and you're bigger, sure, but typically people who are bigger have a higher waist to hip ratio, and that's been shown to be biological attractiveness. So you got to be careful with this whole argument here.
whether determined by anatomy, physiology, or chromosomes. Today, anthropologists, along with others, call into question the assumption that human beings come in two and only two biological sexes, and that gender roles are built on those two sexes. As anthropologist Cara Lewis puts it, we cannot understand our bodies except through culture. Therefore, there is no pre-gendered body, and there is no raw pre-cultural body or body experience. While biological bodies undoubtedly exist, we are not brains in jars. How we interpret, understand, and experience those bodies is culturally shaped. So yes, humans are sexually dimorphic, and there are biological differences between the sexes. Nobody's saying that isn't true. All we're saying is that those differences don't always fall into two mutually exclusive categories, and they are not necessarily determinate of gender. But let's go.
Well, they kind of do, but because there's two different because of the nature. Yeah, I already talked about. Sorry, I'm getting kind of tired at this point. I'll finish this video and I'll probably be done with this at this point.
Go one level deeper, because while bioanthropology is the scientific study of the biology of humans, very often when we talk about this stuff, the conversation turns towards medicine. So let's look at the medical perspective of gender. And if you want to know what modern medicine has to say about gender, I encourage you to look no further than the World Health Organization's website.
FYI, I actually have some credentials inside of the medical, the medical field. And sex is actually very important because, I mean, obviously males and females have different, red blood cell counts. They have all different kinds of, they have different dispositions to different diseases, given their genetics and all of that. So, sex is very important to, and we actually divide people up still by male and female. So, trying to erase this difference is a little problematic from a medical point of view. Like trying to say sex is on a spectrum, for example. It's a little problematic. It can cause some troubles whenever you're doing medicine.
On gender and health. Read along with me now. Gender refers to the characteristics of women, men, girls, and boys that are socially constructed. This includes norms, behaviors, and roles associated with being a woman, a man, a girl, or a boy, as well as the relationships with each other. As a social construct, gender varies from society to society and can change over time. The second paragraph introduces the concept of intersectionality, which is really important but not part of this video. And then the third paragraph reads,
okay, I don't understand what he's doing here. Like, I'm going to speed this up. But it's like, okay, you're just citing people who are making claims. Can you please provide a coherent definition of woman and explain how it's not circular?
Gender interacts with, but is different from sex, which refers to the different biological and physiological...
Well, there you go. Gender interacts with, exactly. That's very important, something that people forget
characteristics of females, males, and intersex persons, such as chromosomes, hormones, and reproductive organs. Gender and sex are related to, but different from, gender identity. Gender identity refers to a person's deeply felt internal and individual experience of
which nobody should really care about.
Gender, which may or may not correspond to the person's physiology or designated sex at birth. Perhaps that's why every major medical association recognizes the vital role of gender-affirming care in improving the physical health and mental well-being of transgender individuals.
Okay, what is well-being? What is the good? Is it just, mental stability? Or is it truth? Is it God? This is what these people are not, paying attention to.
And that's not a quote from me. That's a quote from this article, which is written by the president of the American Medical Association. So
yeah, I mean, we have a bunch of people who are educated in biology, but who know nothing about philosophy and who are unknowingly trying to spread a philosophical idea.
So it looks like the reason why the people in these interviews aren't answering the question, what is a woman, in the super reductionist, oversimplified way that the interviewer wants them to, is because women are far more complex and diverse and interesting than the interviewer thinks.
No, it's because, okay, when you say a woman is anybody who identifies as a woman, that's circular. You're using the term woman in your definition of woman. It's a circular definition. This has nothing to do with whether you agree with trans people or whatever. It's just basic logic. If I said, a dog is a dog. I haven't told you anything. I haven't defined what a dog is. And if so it's just like complete nonsense.
They are. Also, does anybody else notice how these interviews are always only asking about women? Nobody ever asks, what is a man? Nobody ever asks about trans people in men's sports. It's always only women.
Okay, so what?
Also, we never talk about intersex people. We never worry about indoctrinating people to be straight. There's never some big public outcry about...
Here's a good question. What is the purpose of a woman? Because if we're defining what a thing is, it's always defined in terms of its purpose, right? So, let's say, for example, what is an eye? An eye is an organ that's ordered towards the end of seeing. So, if I were to ask these questions, I would not ask, what is a woman? I would ask, what is the purpose of a woman? And that's where their brains are going to start exploding. They're going to start going, sexist, 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 patriarchy, patriarchy. Because what are they going to say? The purpose of a woman is to identify as a woman?
About straight cisgendered characters, or straight cisgendered romances, or straight cisgendered representation in the media. No one's ever talking about sexualizing children when they have a straight cisgendered teacher, or see a straight cisgendered person on TV. Instead, it's only when these people have the opportunity to blend sexism and homophobia that we're all of a sudden very concerned about the fabric of society, and the only way to have a conversation about that is by bashing trans women. Anybody else notice that?
Well, also, people only care about women because we have this sort of... this is kind of a side note, but people have this sort of natural desire to protect women, especially men, because they're the weaker sex, essentially. And so people care more about if you're harming women than if you're harming men. If you're harming men, people will be like, good, for the most part. People like, screw men, screw the patriarchy, right? But if you're harming women, then all of a sudden everybody cares.
And then, of course, these videos usually wrap up with the obligatory assertion that there have always only been exactly two genders, and this whole trans thing is just a modern trend, and we need to do some critical thinking and get back to common sense.
Can you just define the definition of women? Please? I'm still waiting.
All while ignoring the fact that the interviewer clearly has no idea that there have been countless cultures around the world and throughout history that have had more than two genders, and that their own inability to escape the heuristics of their cultural upbringing...
So what? Like, lots of cultures have had different creation stories, but you still are not going to, accept all that there's, multiple valid creation stories. Like you're going to accept evolution, presumably, right?
Does not count as critical thinking and does not change reality. And sometimes the person doing the interview takes a big bite of the crazy muffin and points out that race is a social construct and there isn't a clear definition of species, so why can't they identify as black or a cat?
What if I told you I identify as a black woman? Would you have a problem with that? Are you a cat?
No.
Can you tell me what a cat is?
Because they genuinely can't understand, or at least are pretending not to understand, that just because two concepts share something in common, that doesn't...
Well, let me just say this. What if I define black as anybody who identifies as black? It's the same thing. You're just changing the definition to some kind of nonsensical definition. Nobody before 2015, sure, some people did, but for the most part, nobody defined woman as anybody who identifies as a woman. No one did. Okay, maybe it wasn't 2015, but like I said, 1888, nobody was defining it that way. Okay, this is a new definition. So why can't I just change the definition of black to be anybody who identifies as black? Right? It's going to cause confusion, that's why. And nobody uses language that way, that's why. And the same thing with your definition. Not to mention that it's circular.
Mean they can be used the same way, and holy crap, why do we have to explain that to adults? My boots and my wallet are both made of leather, and yet one protects my feet and the other holds money. My headphones and my camera are both black.
Dude, seriously, what the...
And yet one plays music and the other records video. Gender and race are both social constructs, and yet one is rooted in person.
One or things that you put things in.
It's not.
There's almost nothing in the universe that can be adequately described in one or two concrete sentences. I'll give you an example. What is a table? Well, a table, that's really simple. It's a plank of wood with 4 legs that you put things on. Okay, what if it has 6 legs? Is it still a table? Yeah, sure. Are there any amount of legs that it could have where it wouldn't be a table? No, but it has to be made out of wood?
All right. You're talking about accidents now, and accidents is a little bit more arbitrary because they're made by human beings and they don't have like an intrinsic nature. So like you're confusing things, but they don't understand the difference between nature and accidents.
Not necessarily. So it could be plastic or glass or metal. Sure. All right. Well, I have a step stool that has 4 legs in my kitchen. Why is my table not a step stool? Well, okay. I guess a table becomes a table when it fulfills the function of being what a table needs to be in my room. And a step stool is a step stool because it fulfills the function of being a step stool. This is very similar to what womanhood is and how womanhood works and how it functions and how gender works in society. We think of it as a very simple, binary, concrete thing, when in reality, like all things, it's actually spectral. And
all right, just because it's hard to define something doesn't mean that it's spectral, okay? And also, again, you're confusing between natural objects and artifacts. Artifacts, essentially the difference is that artifacts, their unity is imposed upon them by us. So we are the ones who make them a table. And so essentially what they're doing is conflating artifacts and human beings and other, men and women, because they want to say that we're the ones who are imposing the order on them, because they're nominalists, right? They want to say it's our labels that we put on them that makes them what they are. But that's actually factually inaccurate. In reality, men and women are things that exist beyond us. They actually exist in the world. They're not just the result of your labels. All right, dude? Ugh.
Complex. And it's more of a fulfilled or performed role in society. It is a constructed role that we invented and that we gave definers to. And it's just infinitely more complex than a couple sentences. So just be more curious.
In conclusion, just because the answer to a question is complicated or nuanced or unexpected, that doesn't mean that it's wrong. Biology isn't simple. Gender isn't simple. Women.
Yeah, but the issue with your definition isn't that it's complex. The issue with your definition is that it's circular. You're defining woman with the word woman. So it's circular.
Aren't simple. Boiling women down to something like their organs or their chromosomes or their ability to give birth is absurdly reductive.
But it's not. I mean, okay, whenever we're not boiling them down, we're pointing out what makes the difference. Okay? So obviously women are more than just a reproductive system. However, what makes them women in particular and distinguishes them from men is in fact not the property of their reproductive system, but the ordering towards the ends of their reproductive systems.
And astoundingly anti-feminist. And as I said in the beginning, if it weren't for the sad fact that way too many...
What's anti-feminist is making the very fact of the existence of women some kind of like arbitrary thing that's just applied by our language.
Many people take these interviewers seriously, it would be hysterical how much they don't get mad. It's like the pseudo-intellectual version of that classic macho man trope of me big strong man because me go hunting and fishing, you woman because you have baby. As for these videos and the people in them, they already get way more.
Yeah, okay. Like, you can make fun of it, but it's actually a fact, so suck on that.
More attention than they deserve by pretending that they're anything more than fringe hate groups trying desperately to stay relevant in a rapidly changing world. I genuinely envy everyone who has never seen one of these videos, so this will likely be my only time responding to them. I'm Forrest Falkai, thank you so much for watching, have an awesome rest of your day.
Alright, so you didn't define man and woman. I mean, you tried to, but your definition was circular. The only definition that made sense was the definition, the definition they gave in the dictionary was also incorrect, because it was essentially defining things by their properties, and again, you got to define things by their natures. So, complete and utter failure, complete failure to engage with the actual content of the disagreement, complete failure to be coherent. It's just, these people, like, okay, first of all, conservatives need to stop talking science with these people. It's not science that's the issue, it's the philosophy. Second of all, these people need to study philosophy. They need to stop only studying science. So Like I could watch a billion of these videos, and they're all going to say the same thing. Oh, science, 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 science. Oh, properties, 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 properties. It's the same. It's the same junk. It doesn't actually address any of the actual reasons people believed in the binary of sex, or if you want to call it gender, whatever. So, yeah, it's the same thing with everything. Nobody's ever gone through and debunked scholastic philosophy. Nobody's gone through and debunked Aristotle. They've only just ignored it. They've only ignored it and didn't even realize that they were ignoring it. And so, I mean, that's basically the summary of every single video response I ever do, is that these people just didn't do the appropriate homework that's necessary to understand the ideas that they're even replying to in the first place. So, with that, I guess I'll see if anybody posted any other. Well, you know what? I'm sorry. I can't do any more of this. It's all going to be the same thing. So, with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop streaming at this point. Thanks for watching.